The Dark Souls franchise has pretty much single-handedly carved out a brand new genre, which many refer to as the Souls-like. It's a term that applies to games which are clearly influenced by FromSoftware's challenging game design, while often adding in a few unique twists. It's a genre which has become pretty popular among indie developers, as we have a lot of examples like Hollow Knight, Dead Cells, and Salt and Sanctuary. In this video, the goal is to point out some of the important features of a Souls-like. Clearly, it's very difficult to match what FromSoftware does, and I don't think anyone really can do that. But there have been a few pretty good attempts. There were the ones I mentioned before, but for this video, we'll be using Momodora Reverie of the Moonlight as our guideline. If you aren't familiar with this game, it's a Souls-like disguised as a 2D Metroidvania. It's the fourth game in its series, and easily the most polished and fleshed out. The developers Bomb Service have also made a spiritual successor to the game called Minoria. I've yet to play it, but it looks pretty cool. Before we get to the combat aspect of Momodora, let's talk about what I believe is the most important aspect of a Souls-like, which this game totally gets right, and that's the world building. I know Dark Souls is known for being a very difficult game and having that really good combat system, but that's not enough to create a Souls-like. You need to have a world that creates tension and makes the player feel isolated. The world of Momodora is one that has been plagued by an unknown disease. You play as the priestess Kaho to seek an audience with the queen in hopes of finding some sort of solution, or at least some assistance. As you make your way through the abandoned city, you start to realize that the spread of this disease was much further than you could have imagined, and it's even infested the sacred city where the queen lives. What's outstanding about this world is that it really feels lived in. When you walk through the library, you can imagine a time when it would have been full of people studying or teaching. But now all that's left are dusty old books and some evil creatures of the night roaming around. This sort of environment makes you feel paranoid about every corner you turn. You're not sure what you're gonna find, you don't know what to expect. And that feeling of dread, it's really important because it ties directly into the combat. Much like in Dark Souls, the combat system itself is fairly simple. The mechanics are really easy to learn, and it depends on you mastering a few basic actions like dodge rolling. Of course, Momodora doesn't have the RPG aspect of Dark Souls, where you are often optimizing builds and trying out different sort of tactics. You might go tanky, mage, etc. So think of it as a more streamlined Dark Souls combat system. The combat is all about deliberate movements and good timing. You cannot mash your way through this game, even when you're dealing with regular enemies, because each of them have a sort of pattern that you need to figure out to defeat them. And honestly, there's a pretty decent variety of enemies, which is pretty impressive because the game itself is only 5 to 6 hours long. Each area pretty much comes up with its own unique enemies, so you're always having to learn new tactics to defeat them. The environmental difficulty is what stands out the most about Dark Souls and other Souls-like. You need to have that moment-to-moment gameplay be very challenging and cause you to die a lot, so that you can find alternate routes or just get better at the game. In that regard, Momodora isn't quite as difficult as from any FromSoftware game, mainly because the stakes aren't as high when you die. In Bloodborne or Dark Souls, you might collect a lot of souls or blood echoes, and then dying would mean that you lose all of them, and then you have to go and get it back, or else you risk losing it forever, and you might have saved up quite a lot. And also in Momodora, you won't see the game over screen as frequently as you would in those other games. But I don't think that's a major problem, because difficulty can be kind of overrated at times, and it's nice to not have a game that forces you to die a lot so you can get better. It's good sometimes to have games where you learn as you're playing and you can avoid dying through that learning. It's this combination of powerful world building and meaningful combat that defines the essence of a Souls-like. It's also why I say something like Code Vein just doesn't look all that appealing. The dialogue in this game is kept to a bare minimum, and it's only kept to interactions with NPCs. like the other Souls-like games, your character is a silent protagonist. So, it's sort of just more about the environment and storytelling through lore than it is about constant dialogue and cutscenes and that sort of thing. Now, obviously, there are more little things about a Souls-like, something like the refillable potions, which is made popular by Dark Souls. But those aren't major features, because remember, even Bloodborne doesn't have refillable potions. You just have a regular sort of item system. I think you have a limit of 20, and they don't refill. You have to buy more or find them. But does that mean Bloodborne is not a Souls-like or is less of a Souls-like? Of course not. That's ridiculous. Now, it might sound a little cheesy, but when you play a good Souls-like, it just gives you that feeling. There are these moments of pure awe that just leave permanent marks on your memory. And I think it's brilliant that Momodora manages to achieve those moments despite having pixel graphics. Now, I have nothing against this sort of art style, but it's very clear that when you have, more realistic type of graphics or just fully realized worlds, it's much easier to convey these moments than in a 2D game with, graphics from 90s era. If you haven't played Momodora, then I really recommend that you do. It's a pretty cheap game even at full price, so I wouldn't wait for a sale. I'd just go out and get it. And it's also fairly short. On normal difficulty, the game took me around 5 to 6 hours, and that's after quite a bit of dying and, retrying boss fights over and over again. So a more skilled player could probably do it in less. Out of all the Souls-like games I've played, this is the one that grabbed me the most, and one that I managed to see through from beginning to end. Other than actual FromSoftware titles, those are still going to be the best. But once you've played all of them, and if you're still looking for something else to fill that sort of void, then this is what you've been looking for. Thanks for watching.